Welcome back to the channel. I've got something really fun for you today. We're going to learn some CAD. I personally use Fusion 360 whenever it comes to CAD, but I've really been interested in FreeCAD. I posted online about some CAD design stuff, and a really cool member of the community jumped at the opportunity to teach me some FreeCAD. And I thought the best way to do that would provide something that you all could learn from as well would be if I built something in Fusion 360 first, showing every step of the way, and then he showed how to do that exact same thing in FreeCAD. Now, this guy's name is Huck. I'll let him introduce himself.
Hi, Caleb. My name is Chris Huck. I'm a mechanical engineer, and I've been designing industrial equipment now for almost 25 years. And I really enjoy 3D CAD and 3D printing. But most of all, I really enjoy teaching people how to use these tools to turn their ideas into reality too, so we can all keep making things.
Okay, this is what we're gonna make. This is a maker coin. It seemed like a good item to start with because it's got some kind of complex structures in it. I wanted to make it so that it was print in place with the ability to rotate around the center. I'm going to hop into Fusion 360 and show you how I designed this. I'm going to skip how to do the logo on it for now, just the general piece, so that you can recreate this and make your own if you wanted. And then Chris is going to follow up with how to do it in FreeCAD. I started with a 40mm circle. This was arbitrary. And I extruded it upwards. And again, I just picked an arbitrary value that I thought would be a good proportion to hold in my hands. So you can see here, I went for roughly 10mm tall. And then I decided I wanted to chamfer these edges so that they wouldn't be quite so sharp. Have a good hand feel. The default chamfer was too big, so I put in a smaller chamfer manually. I believe it was a 2mm chamfer. Then I wanted to add the ridges around the outside of the coin. So I'm going to use an array here, or a pattern. I created a circle, and then I go to the pattern tool and create a circular pattern. I select this circle, and then I choose the center point, and then I bump up the amount of them. Again, the amount was arbitrary. I was just kind of going by sight, what I thought would feel good in my hand, and I ultimately ended up with 24. Then I finished that sketch and select all of these individually and use them to cut through the perimeter of the coin manually. As usual, there are many ways to do this. This is just the method that I chose to do because I wanted to keep it really easy to explain. So I've selected all those faces, and then I use them to cut through the edge of that. And you can see the result here. I'm just kind of double checking my settings, and there we have those nice ridges. Now you could stop here, put your design on it or whatever, but I wanted to make this a print in place example, and so I'm going to take you through a little bit more additional steps here. So that circle that I just drew is to designate kind of visually for me where I want the outer rim to be, and this inner one is going to be where the hole that goes through the center of it is. So I've drawn out my circles, and I'm going to cut that hole out of the center of this. And then I'm going to chamfer these edges to get them roughly back to where I liked that ridge. I just like the proportions here. And so there we have this chamfered outside of the coin. Now we have to create the inside of the coin. How I've done that is I've created a new component. That's not something you have to do. But I've created a new component in Fusion for this, and I've done a construction view, which allows me to cut this in half visually so that I can work on it on an interior profile here without having any difficulties of stuff getting in the way. So what I'm doing here is I'm just kind of lining this up so that I can draw a line that matches the chamfer at the inside of this. there's probably a way to project that, but I'm just going to draw it. And once I've drawn it, then I can use this little tool here that creates a parallel line. It's an offset is what it's called in Fusion 360. So I've used this and I'm going to move it by negative 0.2 millimeters. So now we have an offset line to the inside, and then I draw a line across the top here. And this next part is important. I also draw a line across the bottom. And then I go and I choose these little scissors and I cut away all of the excess. I accidentally cut away that top line there. No big deal. We'll fix that in a moment. So I cut away all of the excess bits here so that all that is remaining in this drawing is, of course, the profile that we want for that internal structure. Now I'm going to go back in and redraw that top line that I deleted, and I'm going to connect this top and bottom so that we have an actual sketch here to work with. And then I'm going to revolve this. Select revolve. I've got that shape selected. I choose the central axis. And now we have a core to our coin that is free floating and will rotate in our hand nicely. We can take a peek at the whole thing. It looks a little bit weird because of the way Fusion shows different components, but if I select the entire project all at once here, you'll see this looks more like the final. So that's how I would and did design this. Now, before I go on to Chris's segment, if you want to learn more about how to use Fusion, we actually have a whole book on Fusion for makers in our online store called The Maker Shed. There's a link to that down below. Now, we don't, as a company, have a preference for Fusion. We actually have a division where people can come and write books through us and we distribute them. So if you wanted to write a book, you can actually pitch us ideas. For example, a book on FreeCAD might be pretty cool. But speaking of FreeCAD, let's go on into Chris's explanation of how he would replicate this in FreeCAD.
Let's jump over here into FreeCAD and see if we can't recreate the maker coin that you created in Fusion 360. Already created a new document here in FreeCAD. We're going to switch over to the part design workbench. We will need to create a new body, and we will select the origin group here, press the space bar to turn on all of our planes, and then we will want to start with the XY plane and click create a new sketch. And now we'll draw a circle. We will give it a diameter of 40 millimeters, which is, I believe, what you had used. And it's fully constrained, so we'll close the sketch. We will now pad or extrude that circle. And the default in FreeCAD is 10 millimeters, which is what you had chosen. So we're good to go here. So we'll just say OK. And now we have our base feature here. We will choose the top and bottom edges and add a chamfer to that. And I believe you had used a 2 millimeter chamfer on those top edges. And now the next thing we need to do is do the cutout in the center. So again, we'll come back, choose the XY plane to sketch on. We'll create a new sketch. And I'm actually going to hide the last feature here. So we'll select it and press spacebar just to make things a little easier to see. So we'll create a new circle here at the center. And you didn't specify a diameter on this, but I think 20 millimeters looked about right. And so we will make it a 20 millimeter diameter circle. It's fully constrained. And we will close the sketch. I'm going to turn the original or the last feature back on. We'll select the sketch and we will do a pocket, or it's like an extruded cut. So we will click on that. We want it to go all the way through the part. And it's not showing a cutout here because the extrusion direction is reversed. So we will reverse it to go up. And now you can see it's creating the cutout in the center. So we will say OK. accept that. The next thing is chamfering these internal edges here. So we'll pre-select them. We'll just click on chamfer, and I believe you used a 4mm chamfer on that. So we'll enter 4mm on that chamfer. And so now we have sort of the basis for the outer part. We'll do the cutouts around the outside a little bit later. So now we want to create the internal piece that we'll be able to rotate after this is printed in place. So we'll need to create a new body. So we'll say create a body. You see it adds a new body over here. I'm going to turn off the planes of the first body and turn on the planes of the new body. And the first thing we need to do is, because we're going to be working with the clearance between the internal part and the external part, we will need to reference these chamfered surfaces here on the outer ring. So what we will do is we'll select those two surfaces, and we will create a subshape binder for those two surfaces. And you can see here in the model tree, we now have this binder that's referencing those two surfaces. So we can use them in our new part. And whenever those surfaces change in the outer ring, the internal part will also follow along with it. So I'm going to hide the outer ring here. And now we will actually be creating a revolve to create this internal part. So the first thing we need to do though is we need to do a sketch. So we'll pick the XZ plane here to sketch on. We will create a new sketch. And now we need to reference these edges of our shape binder. So we will use the external geometry tool here to select these edges from our subshape binder. And you can see that it's creating these lines in our sketch, and it's basically projecting these edges onto our sketch plane. So now that I have those, I'm going to hide the subshape binder and then look at the sketch. We'll need to create some construction geometry here. So I'm going to toggle to construction geometry. Come in here and draw lines between all of these reference lines. Now I will toggle back to actual regular geometry, and we'll create start our profile for this internal part. It doesn't have to be perfect. We'll use constraints to get there. So now we will make this line parallel with this. We'll make this line parallel with this. And now what we want to do is we need to make sure we get the offset consistent between all of these reference lines and our actual geometry here. So easiest way to do that is we'll go in here and we'll create a little construction circle that will be tangent to this edge. We will also make it tangent to this vertical line. That way when I move those, they stay the same distance away. And then we'll also take this point and make them vertical. And that way all of the offsets remain the same between these three lines and the edges that we're referencing. That distance is 0.2 millimeters in your model. So we will apply a radius of 0.2 millimeters to that circle. And now the sketch is fully constrained, so we can close our sketch. And now we can revolve that sketch about the base z-axis, which is the same as the vertical sketch axis in this particular case. But there's our internal body. I'm going to hide its planes. And I'm going to turn on the outer body so that you can see them in relation to each other. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add the ridges to the outside part. So we'll right click on the first body and make it active. And now we'll go back to its XY plane, and we'll need to create a sketch. And one of the things I'll note here to help with our pattern that we're going to do later, you'll want to look for the seam of this body, and that's where we're going to want to have our first cut. So in looking at our sketch now, that means it's going to be over here on this side. So we're going to just come in here, and we are going to need to reference this outer edge and the edge of this of our chamfer right here. So we're going to use the external geometry tool, and we'll pick that outer edge, and we'll pick this chamfered edge. I'm going to hide the last feature. And so what that's done is it has projected those two edges onto our sketch plane. We're going to come in here and we're going to draw a circle. And we will also want to create a reference point here, and we'll just put it on that circle. And we'll want to make that point coincident with our horizontal axis here. And we'll also want to make that point coincident with the reference edge from the chamfer. And then we'll want to make the center point of the circle coincident with the outside diameter of the part. You can see the sketch line turned green, meaning that it's fully constrained. So now we can close our sketch. We can turn back on our last feature. And now we'll want to select that sketch and do a pocket. It'll go through all on the part, but it's not showing up because it's the default direction is in the reverse direction. So we'll reverse the extrude direction, and now it's cutting through the part. We can say okay, and now we have one of our outer ridge cutouts. So now we'll want to pattern that cut around the outside of the part. So we will select the pocket feature there. We'll choose circular or polar pattern. We will use the base z-axis as our axis of revolution, and because the number of occurrences here is by default 2, you'll see on the other side of the part there is another cutout. We'll switch this to 24, which is the number of cutouts that Caleb used, and you can see the part updates, and now we have 24 cutouts in there. And we'll say okay, and there is Caleb's maker coin as created in FreeCAD. And now the nice thing about this is I can go back and change dimensions on the outside diameter. I can adjust the clearance between the internal and external parts. I could change the number of instances of the cutouts on the outside. I could make this 18 if I want. And you can see it updated. I will switch it back to 24. And now I can also go back to that original sketch and change the outside diameter to 50 millimeters. You can see now the outside diameter has increased, but we've still got the same number of cutouts around the outside. The internal part is still the same. And now I could also come back over here and I could adjust the offset of my clearance between the inside and outside and make this 1 millimeter instead. And hit close. Turn the part back on, and now you have 1 millimeter of clearance. All of these things are also adjustable from the properties over here. I can change this back to 0.2. I don't have to directly go into the sketch. I can just select those sketches and adjust any of the dimensions that are in there, and the model will update. So there you go. Using approximately the same workflow as in Fusion 360, you can recreate this maker coin in FreeCAD.
Thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you learned something, and maybe you'll go on to learn one of these packages. I want to give a big thank you to Chris for showing me how that was done. There are links in the description below to Chris and our Maker Shed and the magazine, so you can go subscribe to the magazine. Be sure to give us a big thumbs up and subscribe to this channel. It really helps us out. I'll see you on the next video.